Hello, good afternoon. My name is Erin Payton, and I am the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and the sharing of our landmark building. And you are in for another wonderful Monday program. We can't wait to introduce you to our presenter and start to hear all of her fascinating information. Before I do that, though, I want to let you know that there might be something that Roberta says that strikes your fancy, makes you curious. If you do have a question or a comment, you can put that either in our Q&A or in our chat section, and we will get to that if we have time at the end. And we will actually unmute you so you can ask the question if possible. So be ready for that as well. But before we do anything else, I'm going to bring Susan Roberts up to the program. Susan Roberts is on our science committee, and she is going to introduce our presenter.
I was thrilled that I could get Roberta Asher to be our speaker for the day on backyard birds. I'm a lover of birds, and I took this picture. You can see that little white sparrow called the leucistic sparrow. He's an albino, but he's got colored eyes. And he hung around our neighborhood for 2 years. That's kind of exciting. Roberta Asher is an avid bird watcher. She's traveled the world watching birds. And she and I also found out we both do yoga and Tai Chi together, not together, but separately. She is a board member of the International Crane Foundation, the Chicago Audubon Society, and she's a member of the Chicago Mayor's Nature and Wildlife Communities, and she's a monitor at Thatcher Woods Forest Preserve. So we have an expert who's going to talk to us on the birds that come to our backyard. We're going to listen to their songs, we're going to enjoy their beauty, and we're going to learn about their lives and behaviors and how can we attract them to our yard. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Roberta Asher.
Hi, everybody. I will start sharing my screen. Thank you so much for joining the presentation. I know in this time of pandemic, a lot of people have been staying home and looking out their windows and discovering there's a lot of birds in their backyard. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and I wanted to thank you all for joining me. My presentation has a lot of pictures in it. Many of these photos were provided by Roger Shamley, who is a former president of the Chicago Audubon Society. So many of the birds that you'll be seeing in the presentation today are Chicago area birds, pictures of birds he took in the Chicago area. And we're going to talk about how to attract birds to our backyards. We'll talk about our resident birds, the birds that live in Chicago and our area year-round. We'll also be talking about some of the birds who migrate into our area to raise their young during the summer. And it may surprise you, there's some birds around here that are very numerous, very common, but they are not native to North America. We'll talk about them, talk about some feeding tips, how to attract them, and tools and resources for bird watching. So if we want to bring birds to our backyards, best to give them what they want, what they're looking for, which is food. They need water, both for cleaning their feathers, the bird baths, as well as drinking. They also need shelter. And if we put up bird feeders, you will often see birds suddenly scatter off the feeder because one of them has sounded the alarm that there's a predator nearby. And so if there are some bushes or shrubs near your feeders, the birds will feel safer going there because they know if they need to make a quick escape, they have a place to go. And they're also looking for nest sites. So bird boxes for nests, we'll bring them in. And even for migratory birds, if you can leave some leaf litter under your bushes and things like that, those birds come through and start digging through those leaves because they know there's insects underneath that they're looking for while they're migrating. So in spring and fall, the leaf litter is a great attractant as well. So here's pictures of some of our resident birds that live here year round. I'm sure some of them will look pretty familiar. And the first bird we're going to talk about today is the northern cardinal. Beautiful bird, and there's a picture of two different birds here up on the screen. And you may probably know the difference is the male and the female. The female, as with most bird species, the female is the more drab one. The theory is that the females tend to be more drab because they're the ones who sit on the nest, incubate the eggs, protect the young, and it's best that they're less conspicuous so that their color doesn't attract predators as readily. And the males, of course, are the ones that are more flashy for defending their territory and attracting mates. So I'll play their song for you. It's a beautiful song, and looking forward to hearing it soon in the spring. The northern cardinal is not only the state bird of Illinois, actually 7 states have chosen the cardinal to be their state bird. Their diet consists of seeds and fruit, and in the summer, when they're feeding their young, they switch to insects, as many species do, in order to have a very high protein diet to feed that energy to their young nestlings who are growing very rapidly and need that protein. But during this time of year, they stay in Chicago. There's no bugs around, but they exist on the seeds and fruits that are in the area. They're unusual. The female sings on the nest. That's not common, but in this case, she does. And studies show that it may be because she signals to the male that it's okay to bring food. It's okay to come to the nest. Things are okay. And they particularly like safflower seed. So if you want to bring cardinals into your yard, to put safflower seed in your feeder will help. And this is what safflower seed looks like. It's a small white kernel and readily available at pet food stores, hardware stores, etc. The next bird is the cute little black cap chickadee that's common in our area. And I'm going to play their song for you. And if you listen to it, see if you can figure out how they got their name. Chickadee dee 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 dee. In this case, both sexes look alike. You can't tell the difference between the male and the female. They're very, very tiny birds. And I'm not suggesting you do this, but they weigh so little that you could put 3 of them in an envelope and mail them for 1 postage stamp. They're very, very tiny, light birds. But what they will do also, because they are small, is when they come to your feeder, they will take a seed, but then they'll fly into some place and into a bush or a shrub or something and eat it there. They won't stay out on the feeder usually and eat it. They'll take it somewhere else. So they keep flying back and forth from wherever they go to eat and come back to the feeder to get another seed. And you may wonder how a little bird like this can possibly survive our cold Chicago nights. And what they do is they, at night, will go into what's called a state of torpor, which is kind of like hibernation. Their system, their whole metabolism just shuts down and gets very slow. And they make it through the night, but then to get things going in the morning early, when it gets light, is they do need food to get going. So again, feeding them, putting food out during the winter helps with that. And helps them survive. They also like safflower seeds, like the cardinals. So it's a good thing to attract them as well. They are cavity nesters, so they are dependent on old woodpecker holes and things like that, and at some of our big old trees, because that's where they will build their nests, and also it's roost sites during the winter when it's cold, or all year long. It's where they roost during the night. They're very curious and friendly birds. They're very good at finding food, and because of their curiosity. And migrating birds, when they come through in the spring, know to hang out with the chickadees because the chickadees are so good at finding food. So they'll look for the chickadees to help them find food as they migrate north. And so us bird watchers know that during migration, if we see a chickadee, look around because there most likely may be some other migrating birds around with them. And our next bird is the American Goldfinch, and also one of our backyard birds. And you can see there's two different birds up on the screen, but it's a little trick because they're both male. And what this is on the left, you'll see the bright yellow goldfinch with the little black cap. And that's what a male goldfinch looks like in the summer. And they molt twice a year. So they molt again in the fall into this much more drab plumage. And they spend the winter that way. And then they molt again in the spring. So they molt twice a year, and they molt back into that pretty yellow plumage. I will now play their song for you. So their song ends with sort of like this potato chip rhythm, potato chip, potato chip. They are the last birds to nest during the season. They wait while they will pick their mates early in spring when the other birds do. They will wait to actually nest until midsummer. And the reason for that is their favorite food, their native food, is Niger. It's thistle. And when you think of when thistle plants flower and set their seed, it's perfect timing for when the goldfinches have nestlings that they need to feed. They are strict vegetarians. They do not switch to eating protein during the summer. So to have that plentiful source of food at a time when they're working hard to feed their young is the timing, and why they tend to be the last ones to, or they are the last ones to nest. And here's a picture of thistle if you want to attract goldfinches to your yard. It's a little tiny black seed. It's called thistle or Niger. And you can see that these feeders are very well designed to hold the thistle seed. And you can find some feeders that actually the port for the food is underneath the perch. So the birds hang upside down to get that. And the advantage of that is if you don't want to feed a bunch of thistle to house sparrows, it's more difficult for them to get at the seed than the goldfinches are very adapted to it. And the other finch that we have in the area is the house finch. And here you can see the picture of the male with the pretty red head and breast. and the picture of the female who doesn't have that red color. Here's their song. And you'll hear that song pretty soon. They are the first birds to start to sing in the spring, and it's actually still winter. They will start singing next month. So it's always a welcome time when I hear that, because then I know gradually over the next few months, the dawn chorus will build and build. So it's a welcome sound in February. They are not native to our part of the country, even though they're so plentiful now. They actually were a bird that existed in the western part of the country, and they were brought to New York. Somebody brought a cage full of them to Long Island in hopes that they could sell them as caged birds. And apparently that wasn't successful, and they let all those birds go. And they were very successful and spread and spread. The first house finches came to Illinois in 1971. So they've only been around here for 50 years, but they're very, very numerous and very successful. And another common bird for us around here is the Downy Woodpecker. And you can see the difference between the male and the female, that the male has that pretty little red cap, while the female's head has no color on it. So that's how you tell the difference between the male and female. And I'll play their song for you. And woodpeckers really like suet, so attracting them to your yard, putting out suet is a great way to do it. They really do like it. They also like sunflower seeds, so it's another attractant for them. And we're all familiar with the woodpeckers and the noise that they make when they're on a tree and looking for food. Interesting though, when they are actually feeding, they actually make a very quiet, soft tapping sound. So when you hear a woodpecker making a very loud, we call it drumming sound, they'll find a hollow part of a tree where it really reverberates. It's actually a woodpecker equivalent of singing. And they will use that drumming as well as a song to attract mates or to declare their territory. So when you hear a loud, when they actually are feeding, it's actually quite soft. And here's another common woodpecker in our area, the red-bellied woodpecker. And unfortunately, yes, so you can see in this picture, they do have a red wash on their belly. You rarely see it, however, because you usually see them up against a tree like that. And interestingly, people, of course, want to call these a red-headed woodpecker because you can see all the red color on their head. But there actually is a red-headed woodpecker that's different. And the red-headed woodpecker looks like this. And it is not really a backyard bird. It's a bird very specialized to savanna habitat. Beautiful, beautiful bird. And but because of that situation, we call this a red-bellied woodpecker instead. Woodpeckers have some very interesting adaptations in order to accommodate their lifestyle or their feeding style. You will also often see them clinging to the side of a tree or tree trunk and hopping up and down the tree. And in their feeding style, this tongue can go out 2 inches. It's very long. Their saliva is very sticky and there's little barbs on the tongue. So they can reach way deep into the crevice of the bark of trees to pull out insects. And that is how they find their food. Their tail, the feathers on their tail are unusually stiff, which helps them prop and gives them leverage as they move up the tree the way they move. And their feet are different from other birds as well. Most perching birds have 3 toes up and 1 toe down, which is what they use to clamp on to branches or the perch on a bird feeder. These birds actually, you can see here, have 2 toes up and 2 toes down. And that helps them cling to the side of the tree more easily. Woodpeckers have a very large hippocampus, which is the part of a bird's brain associated with memory. And the reason perhaps for that is that they do cache food. They will take seeds off your feeder and they will jam them into the bark of a tree and cache them for future use during the winter, perhaps when food is not as plentiful. And studies have showed that these guys can remember the location of as many as 2,000 nuts that they've cached around their area, around their territory. And so it's really an adaptation that's really quite amazing. And another bird for us is the white-breasted nuthatch. And I will play their song for you. And you know, we can hear that now this time of year. They sing all year round. And one of the ways that you can identify a nuthatch is this posture, where they're on the side of the tree and their head is actually down. They are the only bird that will perch like that. So when you see a bird with its head more down, that's a nuthatch. And the male and female look alike. And the reason that they have their name is that the way they feed is that they will take a seed off your feeder, they will jam it into the bark of a tree and peck at it and hatch the nut out of the seed. And so that is how they got their name. They tend to flock with chickadees, and so they're very common around here, especially this time of year. Another bird that I'm sure you all recognize, the mourning dove. And I'll play their song for you and you can guess how they got their name. It's a very sad song. So thus the mourning dove. They feed on the ground. So they do a nice job of cleaning up the waste seed that other birds drop underneath your feeder and help keep your yard clean. They eat as much as 12 to 20% of their body weight every day. Takes a lot of energy to keep them going. And so it's about 71 calories that they eat every day. And when they take off from the ground, you'll notice that their wings make a whistling sound. The air flowing through their feathers makes this whistling sound when they take off. And our next bird is the blue jay, also a bird found around here. Blue jays really like acorns. And so blue jays have been credited with the spread of oak trees around North America after the last glaciers. They're great mimics. They will mimic other birds' songs, and they're particularly good at the red-tailed hawk. And I remember probably about 10 years ago, one day I went outside and I heard a red-tailed hawk calling from a low bush in our neighbor's yard. And I thought, that's a really strange place for a hawk. So I walk over and investigate, and a blue jay flew out. So they fooled me. And also an interesting thing about blue jays is if you, again, I'm not suggesting anybody do this, but if you were to take one of their feathers and grind it up such that it loses its structure, their feathers are actually sort of a grayish brown. And that blue that you see is because of the structure of the feather is such that it reflects the blue part of the light spectrum. And so their color comes from that source. And another bird that we all know is the common crow. They're longer-lived birds. They're very social. They stay together in families. And because they're a little longer lived, they don't breed for their first 2 years. So last year's young will stay with their parents and help raise this year's brood before they go off and mate and start their own families. They're very, very smart birds. Studies have shown that they can recognize people, recognize faces. There was a study done where somebody walked under a tree with a crow's nest wearing a mask and got up into the tree and started fussing around the nest. And of course the crows mobbed him to stop that. And the next day he walked under the tree without the mask, and the birds just ignored him as he walked under the tree. And the next day he came back wearing the mask, and the birds immediately went and mobbed him to make him go away. They also recognize vehicles. I heard a presentation a few years ago by a fellow who was doing a research on a large roost of crows out in the western part of the country. And every time he would go out there into where the roost is and he'd collect whatever the data was that he wanted, he would come back to his truck, which is in a nearby parking lot. He always parked in the same place. And the crows would be waiting for him at his truck because they knew he had a bag of peanuts. And he would always come out afterwards and put out some peanuts for them and then get about his business and go on his way. And one time he went to collect his data, but they were repaving the parking lot and he had to park further away than he normally did. And when he was done, he went back to his vehicle. The crows had found his vehicle. They were over in the other part of the parking lot waiting for him to get their peanuts. So fascinating birds. Another, you might wonder, okay, we've talked about all these birds. Who's a predator? Who's a predator of all these birds in our area? And the common one is the Cooper's hawk. And these are birds that will come. They kind of know about bird feeders, and they have been attracted into coming into the suburbs more than they have historically. Their natural habitat is the forest, and they would prey on these songbirds in the forest. But they're becoming more and more common in our backyards because they know we put up these cafeterias for them. And it's a tough business being a Cooper's hawk because they do fly very quickly through the forest low to capture their prey. And studies have been done of Cooper's hawks that 23% of them will show evidence in their skeleton of some sort of a fracture. So it's tough to fly around and catch little birds. But they're good fathers. The male Cooper's hawk actually builds the nest and forages for food and brings that food to the female while she's on the eggs, while she's incubating. And he keeps that up because it takes about 90 days for the eggs to incubate and hatch and for them to feed their young so that they finally fledge. So they both work together, and the males are very good fathers. And here are the species that are more common around here that we are not native to North America. The first one is the very common house sparrow. Here you see the pictures of the male and the female. And they were first introduced in New York in 1851. An Englishman missed his house sparrows because house sparrows are native to Great Britain. And so he missed his house sparrows. So he brought over a bunch of them. He shipped them over and let them go in New York, and they were very successful. And because they're very good at going after nest sites, they will shoo, they're very aggressive, and they will shoo our native birds out of nest sites. So they have, unfortunately, contributed to the decline of our native birds. They also don't care for safflower seeds. So it helps if you don't want to feed a lot of house sparrows to use safflower instead. And the other bird around here, common that is not native, are starlings. And here's two pictures of starlings. We don't know if they're male or female. Both sexes look alike. But if you look at the background of the pictures, you can give you a hint as to what the difference is. Starlings molt in the fall. And so when they get their new feathers in the fall, their new feathers have these pretty white tips on them. And so starlings this time of year are speckled with these white tips. And then as the year goes on, their feathers get worn and those white tips wear off. And so by summer, they've lost those white tips, and they're much more of a solid color. They are native to Europe, and they were introduced in the 1890s in Central Park, New York. A Shakespeare enthusiast wanted to introduce all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's plays to Central Park, and did so. And the ones that were successful were the European starlings. And so they're throughout North America today. There's over 200 million of them. They're very common and very plentiful. They travel around in very large groups. You especially see them in the fall. A big group of them will descend on a tree that still has fruit on it. And they also safflower is not a preferred seed for them. So that helps as well in terms of, if you don't want them around to your backyard, they don't like safflower. So here are the birds that come in the summer to our backyards to breed. And our first bird is the American robin. And I think we'll all be eagerly awaiting to hear their song soon. Robins come back very early in the spring, and some will stay in the winter. If there's food around, some of them will not migrate, but they don't go very far south. So they get back here very early in the spring, and so they get lots of time through the summer, and they can have as many as 3 broods every summer. We see them most commonly in our lawns in the morning as they search for worms for protein to feed their young. But in the afternoon, they'll switch to eating fruit, and in the winter they eat fruit. So that's why we more commonly see them. They're easier to see because they're out on our lawns in the summer versus the winter. When they come through your yard, they'll kind of cock their head, and people think they're listening for worms. They're not. They actually do find the worms by sight. Our other little bird is the house wren, that it's only here during the summer. The male and female look alike, and here's their song. So if you have a wren nesting in your yard, it's kind of a mixed blessing because they will keep that up all day long while they're singing. And they're known to be very feisty little birds. And so they make that chattery sound a lot. They use nest houses. So if you put nest boxes up, very likely you could get a house wren. An interesting thing that they do is when they build their nests, they put spider eggs in the nests. And we're guessing that the reason they do that is it can get a little messy in there as the young birds grow up, and parasites develop or can come in. And so the spider eggs will hatch, and the larvae will eat the parasites in the wren's nest and help keep it clean. They are strictly insectivorous, so they have to migrate. They have to go someplace where there are insects available through the winter. And our other migrant that comes here in the summer is the wonderful, wonderful ruby-throated hummingbird. And they are here from May through September. They are the only hummingbird that comes to the eastern part of the United States, east of the Mississippi. So if you're east of the Mississippi and you see a hummingbird, except for very, very, very rare occasions, what you'll be looking at is a ruby-throated hummingbird. And they feed both on nectar and on insects. They're also flycatchers, so they will fly around catching gnats, some little tiny insects for food. And so that's their protein source for when they're feeding their young, but they will readily come to hummingbird feeders with nectar. And for one of the ways that you can attract them, in addition to putting up feeders, is near the feeder to get their attention, plant some red flowers. Salvia is a great choice, something like that they're attracted to the color red. So that will make them aware of the presence of your feeder. Their metabolism is amazing. Their wing speed as much as 53 times a second. And that's that humming sound that creates that humming sound that when they fly past you that you hear. They can't walk or hop. And if we go back to that picture, you'll see that they have these feet that they use to perch on trees and on feeders, but they can't land on the ground. They don't really, they have legs, but they're tiny. And so they're adapted very much to perching only. And the amazing thing about ruby-throated hummingbirds to me is these tiny little birds migrate twice a year across the Gulf of Mexico. And so in the fall, there's hummingbird festivals down in Texas and the Gulf Coast, because these birds all come to the coast. They have to face a long migration where they can't stop. So they need to feed, they need to put out a tremendous amount of weight to have the energy stores that they need to make that migration. So even here in the fall, we'll notice that there's a lot more hummingbirds coming to our feeders in September, the very end before they leave, because they have to gain a lot of weight to have the energy they need, even to make it to the Gulf Coast. And then they do it over again before they cross the Gulf. They tend to go into the Yucatan Peninsula, into Mexico, spend the winter there, and then do it all over again in the spring. And our last bird that I wanted to talk about is the dark-eyed Junko. And believe it or not, this is a bird who actually comes to Chicago for the winter. They breed much further north, up in the boreal forest and in the Arctic. And so they come down here to spend the winter. And they're cute little birds. They kind of look like they're wearing a tuxedo. And they also are ground feeders. So they also provide us a great service in the winter because they will clean up all the seeds that are dropped underneath your feeder. And so look for these guys underneath your feeders. And they are strictly seed eaters. So, and here's their range map. This green part is where they spend the summer, way up north in the Arctic. And then they come through and then spend the winter down here in southern North America. So we've gone through all the birds, but I wanted to make you all aware, in case you haven't heard of this, we are coming up next month on the annual Great Backyard Bird Count. And so this is a time when it's the Great Citizen Science Project. People spend 4 days, and this year will be February 12th through 15th, reporting all the birds that they find in their backyards as they're looking out their windows. And so I encourage you folks that are bird lovers and are watching your feeders and watching your backyards to go to this website, birdcount.org, and find out more about it and find out how you can participate and report the birds that you find in your backyard during that period of time. I wanted to make you a little aware of some other resources because of the things that you can do in your backyards, in addition to putting up bird feeders, is very important as well, if you can, to plant the right kinds of plants that will attract birds. They're looking for natural food as well. So plants that produce the kinds of seeds that are native plants, because these birds being native are going to look for native plant food. So the Chicago Botanic Garden, here's a website if you want to take a screenshot with information about the kinds of plants that you can plant in your backyard that will produce the fruits and seeds that these birds are looking for. Also, the Morton Arboretum has some information as well. And then finally, our Chicago Audubon website, chicagoaudubon.org. Please go to that, and we have information as well about the kinds of plants that will attract birds to your yard. And for those who want a little more information about how to identify birds, field guides, there are online apps for your phones and things like this, but it's kind of handy to have a book as well, because that lays out on the pages all the birds that might be similar to the one you're looking at and helps you narrow in on which bird that you're looking at. Here's some, there's many website field guides available. Here's some of that I used very readily when I was learning how to identify birds. And I also encourage you to look into the Chicago Audubon Society and consider joining us. You know, our mission is to connect people with birds and nature. And so we provide a lot of programming as well in terms of, you know, right now, of course, everything is on Zoom. But we've had some great programs, and we also do bird walks, much more so when it's safe. We will pick that up again. We're doing a little bit now, but you need to register because we limit how many people can join a bird walk right now. But that's a great way to learn birds, is just to get out on bird walks with various birding organizations, and people, you know, people are very happy to we're always thrilled to have new birders, because now we see the birds for the first time through your eyes, And so we love it when new people come along and join us. We also do conservation advocacy and some habitat stewardship. So please consider joining or looking at us. You can learn more at our website, chicagoaudubon.org. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was so wonderful. And to hear those songs and think about spring is definitely something I'm into right now. I guess we have some questions, but I have a question. So let's say I'm gonna go bird watching or birding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Like how long? Like, do you have a list of birds that you're hoping to find, or do you just go and see what you see, or is it different with everything? And how long does it take to find the bird you're looking for? And do you know where they might be? I have so many questions.
Sure, sure. Birds will be specific to certain habitats.
Okay.
So depending on if you're in a forest, you will see certain kinds of birds. If you're in a prairie, you will see other species of birds. If you're on the lakefront, you'll see a very, very different group of
So you have
birds.
an idea of what kind of birds are where, but
Yeah. And so I love it because for me, it's kind of a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt. Just go to the places where birds are, and whoever appears, appears.
okay.
And, you know,
So you're
it's
just more, I'm happy
it's
to
an
see what
adventure.
I see. I'm happy to see what I see. Maybe I hope I'll see this one thing, but whatever I see will be great.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And, there are rare birds that come through the areas, and people know that they're out there, and they will go to those places and try to see some of the more rare birds. So it all depends on your own taste and your own sense of adventure and what you're looking for. But for me, I just get out there and see what I see, and and I always see something fun.
Oh, that's good. But I'm
Yeah.
sure seeing a rare bird is like getting a feather in your cap. Okay, enough from me.
Good one.
We've got lots of questions. Okay. Um, Sharon.
Hi. My question was, do you know if the monk parrots are still around? They used to come to Berwyn and feed on the bird feeder, and there were nests in the area, but those trees were knocked down by lightning, and then they would nest in like cable satellite discs or whatever you call them, and
Yeah.
now they clean those out. So I wondered if there were any in the area, if you might know.
I don't know of any in the area. Yeah, they're colony nesters, and yeah, um, some of those colonies have been cleaned out. So they were still around Jackson Park, the south side of Chicago, for a while, but I haven't heard recently if they're still there or not.
Okay. And are monk parrots?
Parakeets, monk
Oh,
parakeets. And they're not native, but they were thriving. As those colonies built, they seemed to be doing pretty well, but I'm not sure now.
um, okay. Here's a great question from Lauren. Lauren, I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi there. So we've had a bird feeder out for about a month now and have tons of woodpeckers and cardinals and everything around. And all of a sudden, the last few days, it's been empty, like totally empty. And we've noticed a couple of times each day a hawk. We live right by a forest preserve. And I think the hawk is hanging out in the area. So they're all staying away. Is the hawk going to relocate? How do we get the birds back and get the hawk to find a new spot?
Well, it may not be a bad idea to give it a rest for a little while, and those birds should be able to find food at other people's feeders. I mean, the hawk's going to follow them around, but maybe not. Maybe that hawk may give up on your area and go elsewhere, and then you can start feeding again. But I wouldn't wait too long, get the feeder back up and see what happens. Maybe the hawk moves on. They have big territories.
Yeah, we saw our first hawk ever in our backyard a week and a half ago, just sitting on a branch. We'd never seen one before. It was
Yeah.
exciting. It was really cool. Karen Pietrini, she says, you showed multiple hummingbirds at your feeders. In my experience, one hummingbird chases the others away from feeders. They bombard each other. What can you tell me?
So yeah, the pictures that I had, I suspect I were taken probably down more in the Gulf Coast, because those birds really do mob feeders
They do.
down there in that situation during migration, when they're all now just at that point just focused on getting the energy they need to make that migration. So they become a lot more cooperative. Plus there's just so many. There's no point, you can't chase each other away. There's too many of you. So it's a very different situation around here during feeding, during nesting season. Yes, you're absolutely right. They're very, very territorial. And so what I've done is I've put up 3 feeders around my house, but I've put them up on different sides of my house so there's no line of sight from one feeder to the other. And that way, if one bird's really being dominant, it can't watch the other 2 feeders if it's on one feeder. So it gives more of them a chance to feed. And they do tend then later in the summer when the juveniles are feeding, they do tend to give them a break. And so you might see multiple birds on your feeder, maybe, late August, September, when the juveniles need to feed as well to make the migration.
That's a great idea. The 3 different feeders where they're all out of sight of each other.
Yeah.
Agatha, lots of questions, Roberta. This is great.
Hi there. Recently, the Sandhill Cranes have migrated south, and many people have seen them overhead. And I lived in West Texas for 3 years, and the Sandhill Cranes come down there to West Texas. And I've seen one incident while I was there. There was an Air Force base at that place, and a Sandhill crane actually got inhaled into the jet, and $1 million plane went. The people who were in there ejected and were fine. But I was wondering, these Sandhill Cranes who come across, because they do come pretty close here to O'Hare and the other airport. And I was wondering, are they a problem when they're migrating down for the jets that are going in and out? Do you know about that?
I've never really heard of an incident. You're right, they're around here. But I've never really heard of an incident at the airports with sandhill cranes. Geese, yes, but not cranes, so I don't know. Not heard of that. But they do. We are on a migratory pathway of the greater sandhill cranes who nest up in Wisconsin, and then in Minnesota, and then fly. They don't want to fly over water, so that's why they concentrate in their path, as many birds do, but the sandhill cranes are the ones that are so easy to see. So they come over, they avoid going over the lake. So and then I don't know if you all are aware, but in November, they all congregate at Jasper Pulaski, a wildlife refuge in Indiana. It's just across the border. It's about, from our area, it's just shy of a 2-hour drive. But they congregate in one field in the evening before sunset. It's part of their social structure. They'll eventually, and now they're already leaving Jasper Pulaski and going very, very south. But their migration takes them to Jasper Pulaski. Their numbers peak there in November. And you can go there before sunset and you will see thousands thousands of cranes. The sky is just full of them and full of their sound. It's a magnificent experience. So look up Jasper Pulaski, and I was there this fall, and their numbers were huge, like 20,000. It was magnificent.
Wow, that is so cool. And I'm sure bird watching is something you've been able to do during the pandemic because it's something that is outside. You can be by yourself and feel pretty safe.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, we have so many questions. I'm actually just going to start asking them because I think that might
Okay.
save some time. A general question we got a couple of times is, what is the best bird feeder? Probably in general, and then also so a family of raccoons doesn't eat everything like it did in mine, and we had to take it down.
Yeah, there are feeding systems you can set up with putting a feeder on a pole, because squirrels can, climb up a tree and then jump across onto the feeder. So you have to have it far enough away from a tree or a large bush. And then on that pole, you can put a baffle that will prevent a squirrel from climbing up the pole.
Okay.
So that's one way you can avoid getting squirrels on your feeder.
Okay, raccoons is tough. That was tough.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and raccoons, same story though. The baffles to stop a raccoon are just larger than a squirrel baffle.
Okay. So that's the best thing, is just to make sure that people or the animals you want to be eating from the feeder get the food.
Yeah.
That's the toughest thing. Okay. Bonnie Buemiller wants to know, where are what's your most favorite local birding spot?
Locally, Thatcher Woods is fabulous. And very, very easy to get to. So I would pick that. Columbus Park is nice as well. So it depends on, proximity to your location.
Great. Diane Stevenson says, this one's funny. Often in summer, we see and hear large numbers, hundreds of the same type of bird in a tree or bush, chattering and chirping. It seems like they're having an important meeting. Then they all fly off. What are they doing?
Being sociable. I know house sparrows many of them will flock into the same bush and all chatter, especially in the evening. It's part of their social behavior.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Nan Brulette says, despite having a thistle feeder, I have not been successful in attracting goldfinches. How long does it take? How often should one change the seed? Other suggestions?
Yeah, they're kind of fickle. I mean, I have thistle feeders out, and for years I had, very loyal group of finches that would come to the feeder, and then they just stopped. And I probably went 4 or 5 years where I'm like, why am I putting out this thistle feed? Nobody's eating it. And then this year, all of a sudden, I was mobbed by goldfinches. I could not keep I put up extra feeders. I had so many. So they are kind of fickle. I don't know.
Or maybe they just weren't exactly in your area for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Nan, keep up the faith, okay? They'll come. If you build it, they will come, Nan. A lot of people are reporting that there are populations of monk parakeets. Marky says at University of Chicago, Lisa says at Riverside. So I think Paulette mentioned saw some this morning, she said. So people are seeing the monk parakeet. They do live on. Yeah. Charmaine says, what kind of bird is black with an orange top of the wing? She sees them a lot near water.
Oh, red-winged blackbirds.
With
Yeah.
Well,
it's a red patch with a little yellow stripe underneath, so it can look orange depending on your lighting. So I'm thinking that's what she's seeing. Because yes, they do tend to nest near water. They do. that
Cool.
attract them. Yeah.
Elizabeth says we love birds and have a large wildflower garden in our backyard, which attracts birds and butterflies. Good job, Elizabeth. We don't have feeders for winter because we fear attracting rats and mice. Is that a rational fear?
Well, certainly storage of bird seed, depending on how you store it, will certainly attract critters. So I keep mine I have a separate garbage can that I use to store the bags of feeders so that critters can't get into, in my garage, so critters can't get into it. So yeah, for storage of the seed, that is an issue.
Do you have feeders up in the wintertime?
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
Keep them up year round. Okay. For the ones that are still around. I have a question. This is in my house, we have, our downspouts, and then we have nests that build, right on the hook of the downspout spout.
Mhm.
And we never knock them down. We just leave them there all the time. Like, they keep coming back to the same nests, right? Or should I?
Yeah, usually not. Usually
Okay.
birds will not reuse a nest.
Because we have the one that goes into our rain barrel has had birds, like we just saw birds the other day. So maybe they're birds that don't leave. They just stay because they were there over the summer. I just saw them last week. They're always there. So do some just never leave and they keep the same nest?
Well, I should backtrack a little bit and say that birds of prey do use the same nest. So
Okay.
big birds of prey, eagles, owls, they come back to the same nest site. So it depends on the species. But for the smaller birds, the perching birds, usually they will not use the
Okay.
same nest.
Okay.
But they'd be using it, they could be roosting in there, during the night.
Oh, I see your point. Is there an economical source for bird feed? It's gotten expensive.
More and more people are using it. I guess just do your research on Google and find out the best place to do it.
Okay. Is there a local place in the Oak Park area that sells amine seed?
Well, the hardware stores sell bird seed. Pet stores sell bird seed. Some of the nursery stores will sell bird seed. I imagine Target sells it.
Okay, great. All right, I'm looking for how does one attract Orioles? Rosemary wants to know.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So in May, when they come through, they love oranges.
Oh,
So they're like the hummingbirds like red, Orioles like orange. And so you can cut an orange in half and nail it to the side of a tree if you want to go that route. I have there are Oriole feeders that you can hang that have like a spike where you can put a half an orange on them.
wow.
And if you want them to stick around, grape jelly. So you put both of those things on a feeder, and the orange will attract them, will bring them in. They'll peck and eat the orange, but it's the grape jelly that they really go after.
Are we talking about Orioles or my 7-year-old daughter? Because I think you can attract either one with that menu. Sharon says that there's a good feed store at Harlem and Archer for bird seed, and that the Chicago Audubon Society has a wonderful bird seed sale in November.
That's right, we do. Thank you. Thank you for the commercial. Yes, come to our website late summer, early fall, and put in your orders. And you can pick up your order. We have an order pickup every year at the Good Earth. Yeah,
Oh, great.
on what is that, Madison Avenue.
Yep. Okay, only time for a couple more questions. Roseanne wants to know, are there seagulls in the area?
Yeah. They will fly from the lakefront, from the roost areas, and especially on a summer evening, you'll see them flying up high overhead. They'll come out into the suburbs. They're looking for garbage dumps. So, or, grocery stores that have big dumpsters out, that sort of a thing, that they'll come and feed there and then fly back more towards the lakefront in the evening. So yeah, they come from the lakefront out here to find food.
Maryland wants to know, where do the hummingbirds nest?
They make little tiny nests in the trees. You'll
Okay.
be lucky to see one, but they make the sweetest little nests. And so yeah, that's where they'll nest for the summer.
Okay. Bonnie, this is a fun one. Bonnie also wanted to know, can you tell us the coolest, like rarest, most uncommon, surprising bird that you've seen locally? Like, is there one that just sticks with you?
Oh yeah, the painted bunting. I saw it down in Medewin, the Medewin Reserve south of Chicago. Painted buntings are these multicolor birds. Google it. They're just this splash of color, a rainbow of colors. They're fabulous. And they live in the South. And it actually was my nemesis bird for about 10 years. Every time I would go south and I'd go to places where painted buntings were known to be, and I missed every single time. And then finally, 2 years ago in Texas, I got my first painted bunting. But
Oh,
one did come to Medewin, as far north as Medewin. And yeah, there were hordes of birders out there looking at it, but it was pretty cool to see.
oh, that is great. Well, I think you just answered, you just ran the gamut of questions, or the gauntlet or something of questions. Thank you for answering all of those amazing questions. And thank you, attendees, for posing such amazing questions. Roberta, is there anything you want to add, that just after all those questions, or just that popped into your head as a closer?
Birds are out there, they're easy to see. And just for a nice walk in your neighborhood, to pay attention, listen for them, look for them. It leads you to all kinds of things, cool spiders or bugs or all sorts of things that you see by just being aware and paying attention to what's around you when you're out for a walk.
Oh, that is so great. Well, thank you so much, Roberta. We really appreciate this program. I think everybody learned something and recognized some birds in their own backyards, and now are on the lookout for some others. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your interest.
Yeah.
Wonderful to see.
And we will have Monday programs every Monday through the middle of May. If you want to know what's coming up, just check our website, www.19thcentury.org. The next several programs you can register for. If you want to help us continue to put on great programs like this, consider making a donation. You can also do that right on our website, www.19thcentury.org. Well, for Roberta and Susan and everyone at the 19th Century Charitable Association, this has been Erin Payton, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.